welcome back to Beyond the Feature. This is the show where we go past the buttons and menus and get to the real conversations about how technology is changing the way we work, lead, and learn. And I'm your host, Dr. Patrick Jones, and today we're catching up with a special spotlight guest. So I've got a friend and a fellow Missourian on the show, someone who spent years in the trenches of K-12 technology right along with me, doing the leadership before stepping out to write a book. I mean, literally on what it means to innovate safely and strategically. We're talking about data privacy, leadership culture, the hard truth that innovation without plan is just chaos with good intentions. So let's take a look and get started with this one. All right. I am so glad to have Melissa Tebbenkamp here. She's someone I had the pleasure of knowing. She's built an incredible body of work in K-12. We came up about the same time. She's from a leading technology district in Missouri, advised on national policy, now publishing leadership frameworks being used across the country. Melissa, welcome to Beyond the Feature.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this one. So let's start with something I always love to ask people, because a lot of people listening, all 20 of you to the show came up through the technology side and maybe ended up in leadership, or they're trying to figure out how to bridge that gap. Now you did that. So you went into technology administration with that master's in ed tech, right? And then focused on the technical side and then worked your way into a partnership with instruction, which isn't an easy bridge. I know from a fact. I came from the other way. I was education, bridging with technology. So how did that journey shape how you think about technology leadership?
Wow. That is, I think, the $1 million question. And I wished I had like that magic pill we could swallow to make it all work. But it's really about building those relationships and taking the time to listen and understand everyone's point of view. I did come from a background with a master's in ed tech, so I had the education philosophy, but a great program that allowed me to get the technical background as well. So I had the background in networking and systems engineering and server management. And so when I came in, I felt like I had what I needed to run the network and to understand how it impacts the classroom. What I thought happened, like what I thought would be there, really, when we put it into practice, when you step into a classroom, when you start working with teachers, what we think happens and what truly happens are sometimes two different things. One of my favorite principals always told me, Melissa, what you're expecting to happen in my building and what's really happening here are two different things. Take some time and, dive in. Come here and see for yourself what's going on. And as soon as I started doing that and building those relationships and listening and understanding what was happening, what those changes were impacting, that's when that relationship started to build. And then just being present in all of the conversations and not, I think that sometimes as technology leaders, we have a tendency to pick and choose what we want to be a part of. And sometimes you don't know what you're missing if you're not there. So being present.
I love that. That's a great frame on that one. It's so hard for leaders to do because you have so many areas to look at. And I think what's interesting about your career is you weren't just running the IT, right? You were running it inside of one of the most complex and high stakes environments out there. You were just talking about schools with students and data and families, all of that. So how did that environment push you to think differently about risk and innovation?
Oh, I often tell folks that unless you're in it, unless you're in that role or in the IT department, it's really hard to understand how big of an environment that team is supporting. We had over a petabyte of storage. I had, when I started, I think we had around 150 servers. We started virtualizing some of those, but we still had a significant number on-prem. We had well over 120 switches with 25, 26 buildings networked within our WAN. And if you think about that and you scale it out, so many of our school districts, and this was a medium-sized school district with 9,000 students and 1,400 staff. you get into those bigger districts and we rival Fortune 500 companies as far as the size of the infrastructure we support, the sophistication of the network and everything that needs to go into it. But then we're managing 40, 50,000 endpoints on this network, and data of what I would say are our most precious, customers and our students and our young kids. And I think that when we start putting that into perspective, risk takes a different form, because we're not talking about just risk in the business environment. We're talking about risk in like the human customer service, the human industry of this is the virtual identity, the virtual selves of all of our students that we're protecting. And so conversations about risk, we talk about physical safety. Now we've got to talk about the safety of the virtual student as well. And it puts everything in a different perspective. And then to go even further, beyond just the network and all of the devices we manage, look at all of the systems that our data's in that we have to protect. There was some research that came out last year that stated that the average student interacts with over 40 applications that house their data in a given year. And a teacher then is managing that many applications, and a district is somewhere around 2,000 plus, depending on the size of your district or somewhere around that mark. And so if you think about the number of systems we're coordinating and managing and trying to protect, your risk platform or your risk portfolio profile is much different in education, just because of the scope of what we are protecting.
Yeah. And like you said, it rivals a Fortune 500, but you had a staff of how many compared to Fortune 500?
Yes. And I almost hate to say, because I had a large staff because of the way we were structured. So my team was approximately 30, which is large for school districts. I know so many school districts that have a staff of 5. But we brought in positions into the technology team that would not necessarily be technology positions in other districts. So as you know, we used to compare on the state level of what does my staff look like compared to yours. And you can't just compare numbers, because you might have somebody that fills that instructional support role that's part of the instructional team, where I might have it as part of the technology team. Or you might have that librarian that's a librarian that's providing that basic tech support, where another person has it as a tech employee. So apples to apples comparisons don't really work for us. But even at that, a Fortune 500 company with the scope of what a school district has, you're talking hundreds of people on the tech team, hundreds. Yeah. And we're doing it on a fraction of that. Yes. At a fraction of the pay, right? So the level of expertise you can bring into your staff is different compared to these bigger corporations that are marketing and recruiting and paying more. We're typically getting folks that we're training up into these positions, which changes your risk profile as well too, right? Because we don't have the expertise. So then we lean very heavily, a lot of districts do, on consultants and experts in the field to help guide us, because we don't always have the staff that has the knowledge to do that.
And that's where your book comes in, right? So let's talk about your book, because One Road Leadership Blueprint for Safe Strategic Innovation, right? And for those watching, the link will be in the show notes. First, tell us what the book is, and then I want to know what made you feel like the world needed this book right now.
That is, the book is a leadership insight blueprint on how to innovate without all of the technical jargon. So this is a culmination of probably about 12 years of trainings, over a decade of trainings that I've done, and conversations I've had with my tech leaders, my colleagues. I do a lot of data privacy training, cybersecurity training, and my general audience are tech directors, technology staff. And I heard from them so much. I just wish my superintendent had this conversation in a way that they could understand, because I truly believe that cybersecurity, data privacy is not a technology responsibility. It is a district leadership, organizational leadership responsibility. It should be a priority within the organization. And how do we how do we have that conversation in a way that is understandable to all of the key stakeholders in leadership? Because when we start talking about technology and IT, that language is not the language of school leadership. And we often then wonder why there's this disconnect. So what this book is not a guide for the tech director on how to build a privacy program and how to be FERPA compliant. Like, I do all of those trainings. There's a lot of resources out there. I will probably write a book in the future for that. But this is the one that was, I would say, the most requested, which is, how do we have this conversation? How do we get district leadership going in the direction we need them to go when it comes to data privacy, innovation, cybersecurity? And the reality of it is, and from what I learned in my district and all of the partnerships that I built, was it is the same conversation they're having already in cabinet about curriculum alignment, about strategic planning, where the district is going. It is all the same conversation. And this is where One Road comes. We can all follow that same path and get to all of our goals. I used to say we had multiple paths to the same goal, but we all have different goals in our positions. We all have different motivators, but we could follow one path and achieve them all if we do it well, with integrity and intention.
Nice.
And alignment.
Yeah, I love that. And that title fits it, right? One Road. That's doing the work, right? It's not saying there's only one answer, but it's pointing at something. So that is the One Road concept at its core right there, right?
Absolutely.
All right. So there's a framework that you have inside your book. So walk us through that framework. I used to be a director of technology in a school district also. I pick up this book. What is the path that you're giving me?
So the book centers around the culture of trusted data framework, which is the framework that I built. And at the core of it is trusted data. Schools operate on data. Almost every decision we make is based on data. But so much of the time, our data is inaccurate, not accessible timely, or it's siloed. And we're trying to then bring in all of these different data points from different departments under different management together to make decisions, and they don't always work well together. And so, or we're making decisions in silos because that is how our data is structured. And we see that so much. And so at the core is data, our trusted data. And in order for us to be able to trust our data, we need to make sure that it has integrity, that it is accurate, it is accessible in a timely manner, and that it is safe and protected. And we have to do that then as we move out across the entire data lifecycle. And that goes everything from identifying the need to data and only collecting data that we absolutely need, we have an identified purpose for, all the way through to when we're done with that data, how we share it, store it, archive it, and then we're done deleting that data. And man, in schools, that is one of those two, the beginning and the end, are the hardest for us. We tend to collect data that we don't really need because we may need it in the future. I know you've been in some of those conversations.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. We'll go on and collect that because we might use that later. Or we're done with the product and we just move on to the next. And we forget that all of our data is there and it needs to have hygiene. Like, we need to clean it up. We need to aggregate the data. We need to delete it. We need to make sure that it is safe and protected as well. So that's our life cycle. And then once we know where our data is, because by the way, IT cannot protect data that it doesn't know about. This system, the organization, we can't protect data. We can't use data that we don't know exists. So then after that, we have the security of our data. And that is all of the IT stuff. That's what the tech department does really, really well, is the security of the data, the policies around at least the systems that they know about. Again, if they don't know the systems, they can't do that. But that is that small portion. And then we go out a layer to privacy. And that is what the humans that interact with the data, their behaviors, what they're doing around the use, sharing of that data throughout that entire life cycle, the integrity of the data, the stewardship of, following policies, making sure that they're only sharing it with who they need to. And that's really important. And then we move out to the training and the communication and the stakeholder ownership from leadership around use of data and all of the systems and policies around that. and the governance pieces of that, and people, processes, and technology. So we have all of these pieces, right? So we have security, governance, privacy, the leadership aspect of it, to get that culture of trusted data. And really, this framework was developed because of those conversations of how do I help leadership understand that IT can't do this alone. And so this model was developed to show that IT does have a part of this, but they can only be successful if the rest of it is successful. And privacy is dependent on the success of security and governance, and security is dependent on the success of privacy and governance. And those all work together, and you cannot have one without the other.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, because that culture of data, right? They hear that, the leaders, and they just go straight to dashboards and reports. This is totally different.
Yeah. It's so much more than dashboards and reports are like the product of this. There's so much to get to that. And your dashboards and reports are only as good as everything that leads up to that.
Yeah. And with this, you have to teach up to get those leaders to understand that. Oh, it's kind of shouldn't be your job, but it has to be your job if you want it to be controlled by you guys. So I love that distinction. So it's not just what data you have, it's whether the organization trusts it and the systems around it that you can actually use for a purpose. Can you give us an example of what it looks like when a school district gets it right versus when they don't?
Man, I like to use the example of a former, as I'm going to get, associate superintendent. And this is what it looks like when it is right. And this is data governance all the way through. So we get system requests come in, they get vetted. We look first at curriculum alignment. And if it doesn't align, then it doesn't go through the process anymore. So we start with curriculum. We see so many folks start with a tech, that tech, does it pass the tech filter? Is it secure? But that's not prioritizing what's really important. We're going to prioritize curriculum first. So we go through curriculum alignment, and then we see whether or not it's a duplicate system. Do we already have a system that does this? Because we don't want to overwhelm our families and our teachers and our administrators. And by the way, your instructional coaches, your curriculum team can't train if you have 100 different options for the same function. You need to be able to make it supportable. And so we look at that alignment, and then we go through the tech review process of it, and it either gets adopted, approved, or denied. And so that's like on that governance side. And what we think is that's usually where we end, right? And we think we've got governance. We've got a vetting process. And that is really just the start. We've identified a need. We've created it. We're at the beginning of that life cycle. Now, how are we using it and sharing it? And then how are we having accountability around the implementation of the tools we have adopted? So where that next level, when it goes right, is that associate superintendent doing building walks that, and they're walking through, just looking, we call them curriculum walks, whatever your school wants to talk about them. And as they're observing classrooms, they're also looking at what technology integration looks like in the classroom. Are we using approved resources? Are we using aligned resources? Are we using them in the appropriate manner? If they see a resource that they're not familiar with, they make a note about it. They check up on that. They digest that. They look at what's being used that's approved, what maybe not approved. They have conversations with building leadership about their findings about integration and innovation and what's being used that's approved. Then they follow back up with that principal where any of the concerns addressed. And we're having those discussions, and we're talking all the way up to the school board. When somebody complains about a tool being denied, the school board doesn't come and say, or the superintendent doesn't come down and say, use it anyway, right? We all have alignment around that common goal. But more importantly, or I should say just as importantly as that, is that as we're looking at new technology, as we're looking at strategic planning and where we're going, we focus on what is the ideal learning environment? What should it look like for our students to learn in our classrooms? Not what technology do we want our students to have access to? That's like 5 steps later. But what do we want learning to look like in our classroom? And then what outcomes do we want from that learning in our classroom? What experiences do we want our students to have? What does collaboration look like? And then when we ask all of those questions about what we want learning to look like for the student, what that student experience should be, then we look at what tools are necessary to meet those goals. And then what tools are available out there then to fulfill those needs. Like, what do we need? Not necessarily tools. I should step back. What functions do we need to meet those goals? What tools to meet those functions? And then which of those are safe for us to implement? Then what learning and what change do we need to have in order to make those effective in our classrooms? So many times in schools, we buy technology because we see the tool and then we find a need for it, right? We almost like invent a problem to solve with a really neat thing that we just found.
The shiny toy.
The shiny toy, yes. That shiny moment that we're chasing, those neat things. Or we just layer on new tools and we don't then kind of scrub out the stuff that's no longer meeting those needs. We add and don't replace. We don't sunset. And so we need to be very intentional. And so much of the book is just about asking the right questions to be very intentional about integration. And from the pilot phase, don't even pilot if you don't have an identified need. Don't pilot just to see. I had a conversation with somebody. They're like, let's just try AI tools because we don't know what we don't know. And we don't know what problems they can solve until we start using them. Maybe on a personal level, yes, maybe on a personal level that works, but we go back to where is our risk? And we're not playing with just my data. We're playing with our students' data when we're doing that. When we're just doing discovery, we're putting our students, we're putting our children at risk, and we need to really take that to heart and determine whether or not it's worth that risk.
Yeah, and that's right along your subtitle that you have on there, right? Safe, strategic innovation, which can feel like you're doing opposite, right? Safe and strategic, and then innovate. They don't have to be opposites, right? You can do both of them at the same time without killing the other
Actually, they both thrive when you do them in unison. That's kind of that, I have a motto, go slow to go fast, which I learned from a great mentor of mine. She used to say it all the time, go slow to go fast. And at first I'm like, how does that work? But it does, because if we go too fast, we skip steps. We don't mitigate the risks. We don't think through all of the obstacles along our way. And then we fumble. How many times have, like, in your district that you were in, like, we roll out something too fast, and then what happens in year two? It kind of starts to peter out, right? Like, we're not
something
really,
else.
we move to the next shiny. But to build a culture, to build sustained progress, to properly innovate, we have to do it with intention, and we have to do it slow enough that we break down the barriers that will cause it to fail. Because if you rush it, you don't have the chance to identify and reduce barriers and risks. And innovation is sustainable when we just take time to make sure we do it safely and strategically. Because when we rush them, we know what happens. All of those tablets get boxed up and stored in the warehouse until the grant's up, right? Like, or stored in the classroom closet until the grant's up, whatever that is. And we see those cycles in education all the time, or we see the interactive boards on the walls that get used as big mice because we've now we're not properly innovating. We're just substituting technologies and like kind of throwing it out there and hoping it sticks somewhere.
Yeah. And that's probably one of the most useful things that the leaders that are listening or that our directors and people are telling people could hear, right? Especially with AI moving as fast as it is. You mentioned that already. So how does this framework work in the era of AI? Because there's a lot of pressure to push those, right? You kind of touched on it. What do you think?
And so the beauty of this is it works no matter what the emerging technology is. If we go back to the fundamentals of what we know is right, make sure it is aligned with our goals, that we have a purpose, and that we're evaluating the privacy, security risks, and the alignment of any tool before we introduce it to our students, then every tool fits that model and that process. We don't have to rewrite it with the next technology that comes out. We've done this before. We've adopted new emerging technologies before. AI isn't new in the adoption process. Does it have some new risks that we have to consider? Absolutely. But when we take the time to consider risks, we consider whatever the risk is with that technology. Because I'll tell you, I vet the risks of a math platform a little bit differently than I vet the risks of my IEP platform. And so we should already be differentiating the vetting of our risks and placements in the alignment, depending on what that tool is. So when we do this right, everything fits within this path, within this model, and we don't have to rewrite when new technologies come out. We don't have to rethink. And AI is a different beast when it comes to data privacy and security and those risks, but we still go through the same process.
Yeah. And that's why I modeled a lot of what I did after you on that process, right? When we were both directors, is because you had that framework as we were directors. And man, whenever we needed to talk about that, I mean, you were with CoSN and you even helped direct those guys, right? So let's talk about them real quick. Because a lot of them aren't really, maybe not in the K-12 space. So they don't really appreciate your work with CoSN and why that mattered and your leadership in there, right? So tell us a little bit about what that means to you and how that helped you and helped us because we followed you.
Well, thank you. I often tell people I made the mistake one day a long, long time ago to sit next to this guy at dinner named Keith Kruger. And he turned to me and he said, "So what do you know about CoSN? And what will it take to get you to start volunteering for us?" And Keith is an impossible person to say no to. He is absolutely fabulous. And he drugged me into the largest professional learning community for CTOs that there is. And it's more than national. We have international membership. And CoSN was, I call it my parentship. You know, our superintendents have the National Superintendents Association. We have that in all of our professions. But what makes CoSN special is that the tech directors that are involved is such a strong volunteer collaborative community and network. And they pushed me to be the best I could and to really invest into what I believe in. And I've always believed in data privacy and security. I always knew we needed to do this in education, but I didn't have that professional network to help drive that. And CoSN allowed me to be surrounded by thought leaders and thought partners that helped to drive the initiatives. And so through that, we developed the Trusted Learning Environment framework, and I helped lead my district to be the first cohort of 7 to earn the Trusted Learning Environment. And I still sit on that CoSN Privacy Committee. I co-chair that, and we still talk about TLE resources and building that instructional programs that are related to that professional learning for directors and technology leaders and superintendents across the US and the globe. And then CoSN has the certified the CETL, right? So you're an educational technology leader, and I actually helped with, I actually was part of that first cohort there on the CETL as well. So that was nice, that first group of 50 to get that. And I believe in the power of numbers. And when we unite and we come from different backgrounds, different perspectives, and we challenge each other's thinking, then we do better. And I think that is probably the most important thing about CoSN is it is such a diverse group of thought leaders and thought partners that we challenge each other, we make each other think about things differently, and together we all become better.
Yeah. And let's not downplay that CETL certification. Again, one of the top 50 in the country. I mean, you helped, design how that is now. That's not a small thing. So for those out there that are interested, what's that process like, and why should technology leaders in education specifically be thinking about that credential?
This is the only credential for our craft that says you really do know your stuff. Back when I took the CETL, they looked a little bit different. We had to do an essay portion, like a written response portion. they did do away with that for testing reasons, but that process of studying and learning through the CETL, I made more connections about my impact and my role to the classroom and to the instructional environment and how to help guide that process than I did through my master's program. It was the number one most impactful professional learning that I did was studying for that CETL exam and passing it. It was fabulous. So if for no other reason but to improve how you approach technology in your district, I say go for it. But it's that credential. We do see districts across the nation now that is the preferred credential before you can get hired into a tech leadership role, which I absolutely love. And it is a large network. We've grown so much more than 50. I don't know how many we have. I should have looked that up beforehand. I don't know how many there are now, but it is such a bigger peer group now, bigger impact, and it is endorsed by AASA, so your superintendents know about it as well. That process, you study and you take the exam at any testing center or at a conference that's offering it. So it's pretty easy to take the test. They've minimized that barrier there, but there's self-paced online courses. There's online cohorts you can join. So depending on your state may have a cohort. I hope it is okay to announce this here for your listeners, but currently the University of Central Missouri is going to be the first university in this region, and I think only the second university in the U.S. to actually offer a master's level course on the CETL, to where we help prepare you and go through the framework of essential skills and all of the components that align around the CETL so that you can be ready to take that test. It is not a test prep course. It is a foundations fundamental course because we don't have the test to teach to. It's not like taking a Cisco course where you're learning all of the test answers. We're prepping you for the fundamentals, and hopefully then you can apply that knowledge. So join a class or join a study group and dig in. But it's great to have the letters after your name, but the professional learning through the process, I think, was the most impactful part for me.
Yeah, because you'll always have those letters, but now you're on the other side of what that means, right? You're not using it in the education space. Now you're advising CoSN and teaching cybersecurity and data privacy to leaders across the country. Doing that because you can see it from different eyes now, not from the middle up and down, but from the outside in. What are some of the biggest gaps you see when you look at where technology leaders are in education today versus where they need to be?
That is a quick question. I see we have a lot of technology leaders that have come from the instructional side so I'm going to step back. Back in the day, a lot of schools would hire people from industry to come in and lead their technology departments. And it may be somebody who retired, who's just looking for a different job at a different change of pace. We saw a lot of that. Or somebody that was a technician that moved up into that role, but it was a technical person. And what we saw was a gap of understanding of how technology changes impacted the classroom. Because of that, I think, this is just my professional opinion there, we had a correction. And that correction was schools were hiring instructional leaders to come into technology because they figured it would be easier to learn the technology or lead the technology team of technology experts and understand the impact of the instructional environment to provide that buffer.
Guilty.
And so then
that was me.
We had the instructional people come in.
Yeah.
The problem with that was based on the assumption that the tech departments had the expertise to make the right decisions. And then for the instructional person to be able to translate those into what the impact was on the classroom. So depending on what side you come from, and we still see both models. Sometimes we see a model with two directors, one over instructional technology and one over operational technology. As long as they work together, that model is pretty good. But sometimes there's power struggles there. And if you don't have a great partnership, then that actually causes a further divide. There hasn't been a good solution. And this is where that gap is either gaining the technology knowledge to be able to guide the technology department in the right direction, and to be able to choose the right vendor partners, because just because there's a vendor partner doesn't mean that they always have your best interest in mind, and it doesn't always mean that they know what they're talking about. They may have also hired somebody that doesn't really know their stuff. So having the leader that can filter that and ask the right questions to really make the decision of whether or not that is the right path for the district and bridge into the classroom. It's hard. We are asking the technology leader in most districts to be an expert in 2 fields. And it is a tremendous, like, I'm so thankful for my program that brought me up, because my bachelor's is in elementary ed. Initially I was going to go into the classroom, and then I had this amazing master's program that allowed me to dive into the technical side, and professors that encouraged it, or I wouldn't be where I am today. We have to be able to wear 2 hats. And it's just, so where's that gap? It depends on what pipeline you came up from.
No, I agree. Yeah, because the same way educationally, I know I had that gap when I was coming up. And like you said, I had great people I could lean on my team, that they weren't, technically they were employees, but no, they were equals, because they knew more about the technical part of it than I did. And I'm going to trust them. And they knew that I knew more about the educational part. They trusted me. And it was that partnership. You kind of have to, and that's kind of what I see as a theme that we're kind of talking about, right? And it's through your book, and it's that leadership is not about having all of the answers. It's building that right system and that trust so that your team and organization can move, right?
Absolutely. I often say leadership is about having the partnerships, the relationships, and knowing how to ask the right questions. And so much of the time, I didn't have the technical expertise over the problem we were trying to solve, but what I had was the perspective of the impact of the issue and the questions to ask to help get us to the solution. And sometimes, and you know this, sometimes we miss the most simplest solution because we think the problem is much bigger. And really, sometimes the responsibility of the leader is asking the stupid questions.
Yeah, keep it simple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just helping, like having the relationship to calm the waters and get us through a crisis. I don't know how many times so many of our days were just crisis response.
Yeah. Too many. Yeah. So now you touched on it earlier. You talked about your trusted learning environment for your old district, which is, again, crazy cool. What did that take to do internally? Like, what did you have to change in your district? Because I know mine, it would have been a whole lot to hit that seal.
So for us, I sat on the group that geared or that advised to the seal components. So I had a little bit of a head start. And I tell people before I say this, know that from almost day one, data privacy and security was one of my focuses. So it wasn't an overnight. It was a long road. It took us, 5, 6, 7 years to build a program to the point where, and I was learning through this and advising and learning from my thought partners. So we were building by the time the TLE came out. But I think that the hardest part of the TLE for us was, one, making sure, not getting, but ensuring that district buy-in was there. That we weren't applying for something that was going to politically get overturned the next time that there was a challenge. That my superintendent was on board with what we were doing. Because you can apply for the TLE and you can get that seal and you can submit, these are all of our processes and procedures. But that is only, in theory until decisions are upheld. So just ensuring that the leadership team was okay with the commitment that we were making, right? This is a big deal. The TLE is a big deal. It is, I call it like the good housekeeping seal of approval. You are doing the right thing. You are professing to your community that data privacy and security is a priority for you. And by golly, if it is not an administrative priority, don't do it. because so that alignment. And then the other thing that I often tell people is that you can do everything right, but if it is not written down, it does not exist for your district. It may exist for you. It may exist for the people on your team performing the functions. But if you take you and your team out of it, then the internal knowledge in your head is your knowledge. It's your process. It's not the district knowledge. It's not the district process. So if it's not written down, it doesn't exist for the district. It only exists for you, and it doesn't get to count. And so for us, the biggest lift was bringing everything that we did well together into a document that was cohesive, that was digestible. And I say digestible, it was like 49 pages. It was a lot. It was that manual. You know that manual.
Yeah.
But just putting it all in writing, being able to articulate what we were doing, why we were doing it, and then making sure that that aligned with what was really happening in the classrooms, in the building. Because we had the framework there. We had that structure, but we were building it. What I see is some of the bigger challenges for schools that I talk to when they're looking at the TLE is that stakeholder buy-in. If you don't have that governance side of it, the leadership all into what you're doing, you can have every policy and every procedure written down that's aligned with the best practices, but are they really being implemented? And is there accountability when they're not? And that's a big chunk. So we often see districts struggle with that governance side and then classroom practice. So it's really that, that top and then all the way into the classroom. The stuff in between we tend to do pretty well at.
Being intentional about it, right? Making sure that we're doing it for a reason.
I think that, I don't know, that takes me off on a tangent, but I think especially in education, we have way too many initiatives. We try to do way too much at once, or we change too often and we get initiative fatigue. I saw a little meme about like a teacher years 1 through 5, they're all in, they'll try anything. 5 through 9, they're like, I think I can get on board. And then your teachers that have been there for a while, they're like, I'll just wait until next year. This is going to go away anyway.
Yeah. It'll change.
This is short-lived. I'm gonna outlast this one. It'll be okay.
Yeah.
And
so you don't have to outlast the program. You just have to outlast the leader that's implementing the program.
Or just have to outlast the enthusiasm, the passion to make it work. Because oftentimes we start something and then we burn out and we back off and then we don't care. We see that so much. I think that's the other piece of advice I give folks is if you're willing to let it go, if there's pressure to stop, then don't start it.
Yeah. And it just make your life easier, right? Focus on the little things.
Focus on the stuff that matters, because if you're going to give it up, then it obviously doesn't matter that much. And especially in data governance, if you start something and then there's this pushback and you guys stop it, then the next initiative you start, there's going to be more resistance or, that belief that, well, we don't have to do this. And then we get into that cycle. So unless you're willing to push through that resistance, just don't start.
Yeah, I agree. All right. So now let's spend a couple minutes on some practical tips. Most of the listeners of this show are like administrators of 365 or directors or people trying to manage technology in their organizations in some way that's moving too fast for them. So what's one thing someone could do this week that's in one road?
Huh.
Yeah.
I should have had these prepared. You can do this week. That's in one road. Reflect on something that is a big burning priority for you that you haven't tackled yet, and identify where your barriers are.
Barriers.
Where is your resistance?
Yeah. And part of your book, you also have a workbook, right? So tell us about that, because when you have that, the reason I said that with the barriers is because that workbook helps flush out some of those ideas and makes it a little more practical, right? A lot of books give ideas, but then leave you to figure them out on your own.
There's so much truth to that. I'm a book junkie. I love reading books. I'm more on that, like that brain research and culture and motivation. Those are a lot of the books I dig into. And I can't tell you how many books I read that sounded really great. And I'm like, but how do I do this? Like, that's all awesome in theory. There have been a couple books that are more tactical. Like, they really give you enough meat that you can start applying it to your environment. And that's what I hope One Road is. Like, there's a lot of guiding questions, and to me, there's that application piece. How do I get started on this? But when you sit down to do a book study and you're all talking about it as a leadership team and you're trying to digest what to do and how to implement it, how you apply it in your district is all filtered through your prior experiences and your prior knowledge. And what we're trying to do is almost rework some of those neural networks, some of that thinking to apply new knowledge into your current situation. And it's really hard to do that sometimes, depending on how deep you are into the culture. And so the intent of the workbook is to help guide conversations among your leadership team, or internally help guide that work. It is, I would love to sit down with every leadership team and go through the book and go through the process and go through the framework and get you aligned, but that's not realistic. And so I poured so much of what I would do in workshop mode into a workbook, so the teams have that to help facilitate a book study or their own process and applying the One Road book to what they're doing. And there's a lot there. It is a thick workbook, and it is not intended to be done all at one time. It is, you pick out the pieces that pick out one thing from this week, or pick out one thing this month, and then keep that, and then flag the ones you're going to go back to next month and the next 60 and 90. And actually, one of the last activities in the workbook is to now flag, what are you going to do in the next 60, 90, 120, the next year? What are you coming back to? What are these worksheets, the pages, the questions that really you need to work through annually to keep you on track? What are the ones you're not ready for now, but you can come back to later when you're ready? Because everybody's in a different spot. And so you may not be ready to dive into certain things, and that's okay. It's there so you don't have to read the book again every year. You dive back into that workbook page.
Yeah, and then reference the book.
Yeah, so, exactly.
Yeah. Now, I follow you on LinkedIn a lot, and you've been posting a whole lot of cool stuff lately. And you posted something a while back, stuck with me. The idea that in seasons when the work grows thick, even the good work, the progress, the small wins, we still need to pause and reflect. So how do you build that reflection into a leadership practice when everything is moving so fast and every season and system is demanding your attention?
I had a boss that, man, he was like a father figure to me, and he challenged me like that. Great mentor. And he would always tell me, if I can get 75% out of my staff every day, that is a good place to be. And I used to think, well, I really want 100% out of my staff every day because we got a lot of work to do. And we started talking through that. And that number, that's not an exact number. That was really, we need to be very intentional about how much we give every day of ourselves to the work, because when we have a crisis, we need to get bigger, or we need to be able to have more, right? And if you give 100%, there is no 110%. It doesn't exist. But in that same thing, when we feel bogged down and overwhelming, his advice was, take a day off. I'm like, what? He's like, take a day off. Like, you've got to give yourself time to breathe. You've been going 110%, which isn't possible, right? So you've been going at 100%. And you have to give yourself time to reflect, to recoup. Or what we do is we filter everything through that crisis lens. We are in fight or flight so much as leaders because we're responding to so much. And if we don't give ourselves time for our brain to downshift out of fight or flight, we're making all of our decisions within that lens of crisis reaction mode. And not everything is a crisis, and not everything is working as well as we think it is. And sometimes when we don't give ourselves time to just step back and reflect, and it might be a walk at lunch, it might be a half a day where we're just going through and we've got a process where we're catching up on the things that happened that week. We're looking through notes. I used to do that, look through notes, go back and reflect on what's happening that week, what's working, what's not working. We built this into our team meetings because sometimes you need to structure that time in. Where are we at on meeting our goals? What barriers are we having? Where are we missing? What is it looking like? And some of those reflective times, it may be 2 to 3 minutes. It is so worth taking the time to figure out if what you're doing is really getting you where you want to go. So many times we mistake progress as actually going in the right direction. And you can be making progress to the wrong goal really, really fast if you don't take the time to realign that back to what your initial goal was.
And I talked about that with Excel, like if there's Excel errors a couple weeks ago. It's the 110-100 rule that if you do it right the first time, it only takes 1 minute. But if you have to correct something, it takes you 10 minutes to make that correction. But if you've already gone so far down that path and the information is wrong, it's going to take 100 minutes to make your way all the way back, to redo what you did, and to correct all those mistakes you made along the way. So like you're saying, reflect, do it right the first time, right?
Yes. Make sure that you've set your goals aligned to your strategic plan, aligned to where you're really wanting to go. And then don't hesitate. Man, so often we get so caught up in, well, this is what we said we're going to do. And so we're going to follow this through. Sometimes you need to intentionally bail if things aren't going the way you need to, but you don't just drop it. And I think this is the mistake we make. A lot of times when we think we're going to fail and it's not going to be there, we just kind of let it quietly go away instead of acknowledging that it's not working. And we need to realign. We need to just start over, change course, whatever it is. And if we can be honest about the fact that we need to change course or we need to start back over, then we're building trust. We're intentionally aligning, and we are not feeding that thought and that culture of I'll just outlive this one, because there's no outlive. We're just writing the course. But you have to do it before you get too far down the path. And so often, if we do quarterly checks, sometimes a quarter's too long, and you've got to look at your project and what your goals are and how much work from point A to point B to determine how often you need to check in to make sure you're really going in the right direction.
And that's the strength of a good leader, is to be able to recognize that. And like you said, being honest, hey, we need to back up a little bit or slow down a little bit or something. Leaders sometimes think they have to be out in front and leading it and, charge like Custer, right? You know what happened. So, all right. So now we're going to do something. It is quick rapid fire round. All right. So I'm going to throw some questions at you, and I just want your gut answer on some of these. So one technology tool that every school district should be using better right now.
Whatever they use for community education or community communication, sorry. So like parent communication, student communication, whatever they're using for communication, they need to get better at communicating with their stakeholders.
I love it. What's one thing most technology leaders underestimate about their job?
The impact that they have on their classroom on even the small decisions.
Best book you've read that's influenced your leadership thinking, other than anything I wrote.
Do I have to choose just one? Okay. There's 3.
Okay.
There is a Switch by the Heath brothers, and they talk about change management and like that resistance to change. And I think that gave me a new perspective on how to lead some of these big initiatives. And then there's the 5 dysfunctions of a team, which really, and I used to talk about this book a lot. It really did change my understanding of team dynamics and why certain things break down within a team. And then none of these are education books, by the way, because and then, so we did a Switch, 5 dysfunctions of team, and then leadership and self-deception. And so leadership and self-deception is a book that I think they have a new one out. I even had my high schooler, my 17-year-old, I had him listen to it on the audiobook. It really talks about like like all of the analogies are adult raising a child or working in a corporate, but I think that some of our youth can benefit from it too. But it gave me a lot of perspective on interactions, like human interactions and where trust breaks down. Because 5 Dysfunctions of a Team talks about the need for trust and the need for communication and accountability. But I was struggling personally with, there were just some people I felt like it didn't matter what I did, I couldn't build that relationship with them. And I would try different things and all of the little techniques that they would teach you and all of these leadership classes, which I don't recommend half of them. And this book helped me understand why. And one of my colleagues called it a huge gut punch, is how it was the most insightful into how I respond, how I interact, and how other people respond and how they interact, and how we often take things personally that aren't personal. And then when we take things personally and we respond as if it's personal, then we destroy relationships. And so, man, those 3 books, just because being able to push through resistance to change is so important, and understanding that, and then and how to manage that, and then just how to build trust and relationships. It's such an important part of our job.
Yeah, I'm going to check that one out. All right. So what is the biggest myth about data privacy in schools?
It's easy to say that IT has it, but IT doesn't have it.
Yeah.
And I think that we're starting to dispel the myth right now that our students' data is safe if we put it out in the cloud, if we outsource it to our vendors, that it's safer in our vendors' hands than it is in our hands. I don't necessarily know if that's a true statement. And, I used to hold a lot of the data internally, and I was resistant to give my most critical data to a vendor to host because they're a huge target. And then I'm dependent on their controls. And yes, it's safer to say, well, if they get breached, it's on them. It wasn't on me. But I would rather it be on me and reduce my risk and do it right than to put all of my trust in them. So I think one of the biggest myths about data privacy in schools is that our students' data is safe. And there's a lot of risk right now.
Oh, yeah, we see it. That's one of the biggest targets. I mean, Zach Lewis, he wrote another book, a friend of mine, and that's what his whole conversation is about, is educational data, right? And how it's the biggest target in the world, for all that.
It is. Yeah. And our humans are our biggest risk factor in that.
100%. Number one biggest risk factor. So, all right, finish the sentence. Safe innovation isn't the opposite of fast innovation. It's what?
It's intentional.
Nice. I like that. Finally, one piece of advice you'd give yourself if you could go back on being that technology leader, and I'm going to say in a school district, but just overall as a technology leader.
Relationships are important, and probably the most important part of your job, because if you don't have trust, which you build through relationships, you don't have the ability to do everything else that you need to do. I came in, I was young. I was young, and I had that technical leader mindset, and I wanted to implement change. But, my personality type, I was more focused on the work than the people who doing the work. And I didn't like small talk. I felt like it was inefficient. And I don't always love small talk, but I do always, I value it now in a lot of the different light. Building those relationships, taking time for the people is probably one of the most important parts of your job. If we just focus on the systems, then we lose out on the opportunity to understand the impact.
This has been an awesome conversation. I mean, we talk all the time, but it's nice to get out there and let other people get to experience you. Now, before I let you go, I wanted to give you a minute to tell people where they can find you, where they can get the book, anything else you want to share about what's coming next.
Will you have the link In the show
In the
notes?
show
Awesome.
notes. Yep.
So Melissa Tebbenkamp, you can find me on LinkedIn, on all of the socials. My name is unique enough. You won't have a problem finding me. And I have mbbtllc.com or mbbtsolutions.com if that one's easier for you. So MBBT. And you can find all of the information about my book and all of the work that I'm doing now on there as well.
Awesome. And I just want to say, hey, the work you're doing out there really matters, right? The fact you aren't just writing about leadership, but you're going out there and equipping those people personally with that, because you're hitting districts all over the country, with the tools that actually help them practice it. You know, that's the difference between theory and impact, right? And hey, thanks for being on Beyond the Feature.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So that was Melissa Tebbenkamp, author of One Road, a leadership blueprint for safe strategic innovation. And I want to remind you that the links to the book and the workbook and Melissa's stuff is all going to be her LinkedIn. It's all going to be in the show notes. So go connect with her, learn more about it. She is definitely the voice in education that we need to hear more of. So, and while you're in the show notes, check out what we have going on over at Olympus Academy. If you want training or 365 skills with Olympus Academy Press, that's out on Amazon as well. Or just hit me up through Audit Solve if you need some training or something. I don't know. But you know how to find me as well. Today's episode added value to your week. You share it with someone in your network who's a leading technology, especially if they're in education. This matters for them. But any organization with innovation and security conversation, it's huge right now. That's how we get this community to grow. And I'm Dr. Patrick Jones. This is Beyond the Feature, and we will see you in the next episode.